We are Freedom Central, coming to you live this Sunday evening, the 23rd of September 2012. Wow, can you believe the year is getting on so quickly? As always, guys, my name is Mel V, and I will be your host for the next few hours. And as always, dealing with all the technical aspects, and trust me, we're having a few of them tonight, is my wonderful husband, Richard. And of course, he will be fielding the chat forum as well. Say hi, Richard.
Hello, everybody.
Well, it's been a hectic week here at Freedom Central, and this is sure going to be an interesting show tonight as we catch up on what has been happening here at Freedom Central headquarters here in the Netherlands. And of course, we have plenty to report back. But that's all to come the second half of the show. As first, we'll be speaking to our guest tonight, Thomas Sheridan, who is an expert in psychopaths and psychopathic behavior. And I've been quite excited to speak to this gentleman. First off, being from Ireland, I'm particularly fond of the Jolly Irish. And also, this is a particular subject that I think is quite poignant for people to understand in these times. Learning to identify psychopathic and psychotic behaviors. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Mel.
Hi, are you there? You're coming through loud and clear. Welcome. You're on Finding Voices Radio live on air with us this evening.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
No, you're absolutely welcome, Thomas, and thank you for joining us. First to say, a big welcome to everyone who is listening in tonight, and of course everyone from South Africa and in Holland especially who's tuned in for this one. There's been a lot of people who've been writing to me, asking me questions. You know, people have been thinking about, you know, what's been going on in the world, and looking at sort of you know, the anatomy of the psychopath and what actually causes a lot of people asking questions within their soul. What actually causes this inert behavior within people? So having you on our show has actually come along at quite an interesting time, because it's on the back of a lot of interesting correspondence I've been getting from people. So thank you very much for joining us. And this is a very unusual topic, of course, to specialize in. And I first wanted to find out what it is exactly that brought you down this path. I mean, you've got quite a journey, I'm sure, that's brought you to all this understanding.
Yes, well, like so many things, it wasn't one specific incident, although there was one significant point that did happen. I grew up in Ireland in the 70s, and, you know, watching all the sectarian violence up in Northern Ireland just up the road, it just, you know, it just always amazed me how people could do things like that were just like the rest of us. And also, when I was 8 years old, I was nearly blown up in a car bomb in central Dublin.
Wow.
So it was around the corner from me, so and a lot, like 30 people were killed. And so it was that always, you know, that was when I kind of became aware of my own sort of ephemeral nature as a being.
Yes.
I knew I was, you know, I knew that I was like finite. And I used to think I was kind of a child that thought very, very deeply about things. And I couldn't understand violence, I couldn't understand bullying. And it just seemed there was no payoff in any of these things. And back then I left school and I went through life and I played music. I went to New York and I became a graphic designer, and I started working for Wall Street investment banks. And I noticed that there was a certain kind of person, I couldn't quite put my finger on what they were, or why they were the way they were, but there was something not there. There was an absence of a sort of a depth to their personality that wasn't there, and at the same time they seemed very charismatic and shifty at the same time. You would be sort of flattered by them, but you wouldn't trust them. Your intuition when you immediately met them would kind of kick in, telling you to be wary of this person. And through a series of happenstances, one young guy who was actually clinically diagnosed as a psychopath after he was a rich kid in New York, and after he went crazy and really got his parents and his family into a lot of trouble, he had been clinically diagnosed, and he just blurted it out to me one day, you know, while we were having lunch. I think he was trying to impress me because I was telling him stories about, you know, the wild times I had when I was in bands and stuff like that. And from that point on, it became a kind of I wouldn't say an obsession, but it was a fascination, because what he described what he was, having no feelings, no remorse, not really caring about anything other than his own basic needs, not even caring about his own family, and not knowing what it was to feel pain or suffer or cry. It seemed to me that's exactly what the people who had come across all my life that puzzled me. that way seem to all have this. So I just kept watching, and anytime an article came up in the newspaper, or so I stumbled upon something from, a report or a medical journal, I just kept them, and not obsessively, but I used to keep stuff and archive them in my mind and stuff. And then when this information really became out in the late 1990s, when it became quite easy to access this stuff during the internet, all the things started to fall into place for me. It suddenly dawned on me, yes, indeed, there are a fairly small, but a powerful minority in society who have a completely different sense of self-values. They've no values, really. They've no morality, and they just see everybody as a person, every person as a target, or a potential target to be targeted, manipulated, used, and discarded. And this was the psychopath. And I felt that although there was quite a lot of information on this subject out there, it wasn't being put across in a matter-of-fact, layperson kind of way. It was fenced off in the world of academia. So I decided I was going to write a very simple book about the subject that would just get the basic story out there, explain what's going on in such a way that anyone of any educational level could understand it basically, and it could be easily translated into different languages. And it was not a book where I was going to, show how clever I was knowing this stuff, because the stuff that was in there wasn't particularly original, although some of it was some of my own insights and how I applied it to the system was. But I felt there was an urgent need to get this information out there to ordinary people, and that became the book Puzzling People, and which, it kind of, in the alternative movement, it got noticed, and it got me noticed, and it became a book that a lot of people have told me that means a lot to them in their lives, because it actually helped them heal and understand the experience they were put through, having been in a relationship with a psychopath, or having worked for one, or been married to one, or had one in the family, or just had a friend who was one that left them deeply damaged. So that's really how it came about. I was guided through this process into this field, and I just felt that there was an urgent need to get this information out to ordinary people, and I felt like I could play a small part in doing that.
Sure, absolutely. Something you touched on there, which I would like to just address a little bit more. You said something very interesting about psychopaths have no feelings, and that's is that feelings of empathy and pain as well? I mean, it's both ends of the spectrum.
I should have phrased that better. They do have sort of like proto-emotions in that they feel anger, rage, jealousy, and a certain kind of rush that's caused by a rush of adrenaline in their brain when they pull off a fast one or scam somebody. But they don't have compassion. They don't have remorse or regret. They will commit the most appalling acts, and they will have no feelings for the person they've damaged. They can destroy an entire company, an entire community, an entire organization, or just an individual, and they just don't, like, what's the problem? I don't care. It's not my problem. And the coldness of it is quite remarkable, the lack of decency, because they don't understand what those things are like. So that to them, it's just, everything in life is just business. Now, they don't suffer because of this. In fact, when many of them wake up to the fact that they are like this, they realize they have an enormous sort of advantage over the rest of us, because then they're basically free. They can go through life manipulating, using, torturing, and just discarding people at will in order to get what they want. So they do have feelings, and they do feel pain, like physical pain and suffering. In fact, many of them tend to be hypochondriacs. They tend to overblow that, but they don't have any compassion for the suffering or the feelings of others.
That's interesting. Extraordinary. Now, tell me, are people born this way, or do you reckon that they're bred as a product of our sort of imbalanced and sick society?
Well, this is a tricky question. A true psychopath, one who is absolutely, cold and dead inside, and could be clinically diagnosed as such, and you could actually put them under an MRI scan and look at their prefrontal cortex and notice a lack of activity within the prefrontal cortex because it's simply not switched on. That's where we process empathy and emotions and dreaming. yes, they're definitely born that way. What's the reason behind it? I really don't know. There's so many theories on it. There's a big push to make it look genetic, but that proof hasn't come in there yet. In fact, the Genome Project was supposed to finally validate this idea of hereditary genes and the heritable factor in all genetic personality disorders, but they didn't find it. They simply did not find a personality in the genes. That's actually one of the big dirty secrets of genetic science, is that they didn't really find with the Genome Project what they were looking for, and hence why all the corporate funding was nearly pulled from it. Now, the hereditary factor, yes, I don't think so, because just on anecdotal evidence, I'm just a layperson. I don't have a big, scientific ability. I don't have a big research team or anything, but there's overwhelming evidence that they just seem to arrive in families out of the blue. It's very difficult to explain. There was an article in the New York Times about child psychopaths a few months back, and the article stated that the research program, that the article was based on, all these kids came from healthy middle-class families, and they were loved, and they were the only child in the family who was psychopathic, and neither parent was psychopathic themselves. It's almost like a savant. They just show up. Now, the other thing you're talking about, the psychopath who could be engineered to behave like that, I call these people proto-psychopaths. What they would be a normal person, but yet they're just because our society is so twisted and distorted. It's so based on greed, to get one up on another person, materialism, and instant gratification, that large numbers of people who would probably, if they grew up in an indigenous culture or a different value structure, would probably grow up to be quite normal people, but they're turned into a kind of a proto-psychopath by the psychopathic system in order to get ahead, or even to survive. Some of these proto-psychopaths may have been a result of a bad family upbringing. They abuse in the home, or, they suffered through a war or something like that, and they're lashing out at the world. But they wouldn't be the same thing as a pure psychopath. A pure psychopath can grow up in any environment, come from any social class, any ethnic group, any race, religion, you name it, and they just seem to appear. So yes, a true psychopath is born. The reasons for that are still out. No one's particularly sure. And yes, there are large numbers of people who would probably be normal, but they behave and exhibit and carry on like psychopaths, because the society that we live in is ultimately, at this point, a machine for the manufacture and cultivation of psychopathic behaviour.
Interesting. Now, let me put this across to you. I mean, we look at sort of like the works of Eckhart Tolle, and we learn about sort of the ego, the dark and the light within us, all of us having a dark passenger. What would you say, perhaps, just as my own kind of working hypothesis, if I threw it in there, that perhaps people who have psychopathic tendencies tend to have the dark passenger playing a more dominant part? It's perhaps because they've not had that exposure to the necessary light, or do you believe that perhaps they just are always dark like that, they're always going to be, and there's no hope for them? Because I still think that even if you are a psycho, you actually can come all the way back.
Well, we're talking about the whole idea of the Jungian shadow here.
Yes,
it's an intrinsic part of our psychological makeup. We all have it. We all have a dark side to us, all of us. And we're not supposed to run away from it. We're supposed to actually engage that dark side and deal with it. This could be a period of going nuts in your 20s and stuff like that. Having a really wild time, hanging out with a wild crowd. Or it could be other things like playing like really intense dark music, or many other things. It's there for a reason. It's there to help your consciousness evolve, and you don't escape it. You have to learn how to master it, because it'll always be there. Because it's engaging the dark side of one's own personality is how you actually discover what the light side is. You find your attributes in terms of your decency and your real ability to grow and evolve as a consciousness. Well, we're in a very sort of a complex area here, and I do agree with you in the sense that it is fundamentally, from what I can tell, is rooted in human consciousness. They have a different consciousness than the rest of us. Now, whether this is probably, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but after all the years of looking at this, I've come to the conclusion that consciousness, just like everything else, is representative of the dualistic aspect of the universe: male, female, positive, negative, black, white, up, down, so on. There seems to be a predatory consciousness, which is the psychopath, and an empathic consciousness, which is the rest of us. And they just seem to, that's the purpose they just seem to serve. They just seem to be there for that reason. Now, that could be an evolutionary process as well, because us as a society being engaged by these appalling acts that the psychopath puts upon us and on society, it causes us to be better as human beings and to be growing more understanding. If you look at their brains under a CAT scan or an MRI, specifically when you put them emotional triggers in front of them, they show no response. They seem to almost essentially live in the lower reptilian brainstem. They have a frontal cortex and they have limbic regions just like the rest of us, but they're not damaged. They just don't go in there. They can't be bothered going in there. It's almost like they utilize the brain that they need for their own life. They just have a predator's brain in terms of how they process it electrically and neurochemically. Can they be cured? Well, there's absolutely no proof that any psychopath has ever been cured. In fact, they've been shown to be just as predatory in their old age as what they were when they were younger. They never seem to learn.
Wow.
They may learn from something like Pavlovian conditioning, where, you know, they're afraid to do something in case there might be repercussions like go to jail or to be murdered or something. But that stops them not for any moral reason. That stops them because it's just to them, it's just a common sense thing that they need to do to survive. So unfortunately, now this is an important point I want to make at this point. Psychopaths, we all have the ability to be a bad person. We've all done things in our lives that were bad and could have been seen as being psychopathic. But we have remorse. You know, we care about what we've done. We care about the damage we've done to others and who we've hurt. And that's what makes us different than a psychopath. A psychopath just doesn't care. We will try to, you know, redeem ourselves and try to make it up to the people we've hurt. And we can't do it to them directly. We try and do something for the betterment of society as a whole, whether it's becoming a community volunteer or something. But a psychopath doesn't like that. They don't look back on their lives at any shame. It's like people say to me, I'm worried I may be a psychopath. And then I say, well, then you're not one. Because if you're worried that you may be a psychopath, that's proof you're not one. Because they absolutely do not show concern for their condition. In fact, many of them love it and glory in it.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much. It's actually good clarification then. As I have in fact myself at one time asked, because I've also been through periods of darkness in my life, and thank you for clarifying that. At least now I know that I'm not a psychopath because I've asked myself that question.
We should live lives like that. We're supposed to make mistakes in our lives. We're supposed to do these things. So that's part of your growing experience, and that's something with the New Age movement really has to get up to speed on that. You know, negativity is a part of our makeup just as much as positivity.
Yes. I absolutely agree. I totally agree that from the darkness comes the light, and you know, one couldn't exist without the other.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Now, just jumping back to something you said that caught my attention, of course. I'm absolutely fanatical about Ophiolatreia, which is, of course, the study of serpent worship and all things reptilian and dragon, myself being born in the year of the dragon, and my second book's actually entitled The Eye of the Dragon. Lots and lots of interesting historical research in it. Do you think, and you mentioned that this is specific to people who live specifically in the part of their brain that's the reptilian brain. Tell me, does your research bring you into any of the understanding of any of the other sort of popular reptilian research that's coming out now? Would you say there's some connection?
You mean like the reptilian stuff that David Icke comes across with?
Yeah.
Well, as a metaphor, it's probably excellent. As a metaphor, yes, but I haven't seen any proof.
I'll tell you why. Well, also, you said something how we have a psychopath that breathes in our brain. The Carlos Castaneda's books, where he speaks to a shaman, he speaks about the same thing, the psychopath, that's predator that's in our mind, that feeds off of us. And it's this particular quote was actually quoted by David Icke in one of his books, and it just seems to tie in so perfectly with what you're saying. It's almost like I can't ignore it.
Well, human beings human society has a very interesting relationship with the reptilian and the serpent. If you look back through mythology,
yeah,
it's probably, of all the animals mentioned in our history, it's one of the most frequently mentioned. But it's usually, quite often, in many cultures, it's portrayed in a very positive light. Sometimes it's a negative light. You know, for instance, in Ireland, St. Patrick casting out the serpents represents it's basically an allegory for the removal of the pagan worship by the Christian Roman Empire. And that they use the serpent as a negative image. If you look at the Garden of Eden, the serpent is the one who tempts Eve to question this bullying God, and so the serpent in the Judeo-Christian sense represents the liberation of human free will. In the Hindu and Vedic tradition, the serpent is often, you know, seen as evil and wicked and lives in dark places and filthy places. That's because they would live up close with very poisonous reptiles in real life, like cobras and stuff. And then the dragon in the East is a symbol and Asia is a symbol of happiness and friendship and good luck. So yes, we have. It is interesting that, you know, I don't agree with a lot of things David Icke says about, you know, we have to shapeshift and things like that. But he's definitely onto something with the relationship between our existence as a species and the serpent. There's something to it, all right. And it may well be rooted in the fact that we do still have a reptilian brain that's literally trying to overtake us. When you think about it, what is our condition? You know, is the condition of the world today, the reptilian complex, trying to seize back power from the prefrontal lobes of the brain, the part of the brain that makes us modern humans, empathic and creative, and gives us language and art and everything. So it's an interesting idea. It's something I'm certainly very fascinated by. In my latest book, Divida Demons, I go quite deeply into the mythology of the psychopath as it's shown in allegory. So yes, there's definitely something to that. I would not completely discount it, and I definitely think it's there for a reason and something very important that we should be understanding in terms of what it means, both in an allegorical and perhaps even a psychological sense.
Extraordinary. That's very interesting. Now, tell me, you're talking there about an evolutionary struggle. So potentially we've got within us this empathic being, a non-empathic being struggling to evolve. Which one's going to emerge? The victor, you know? One would think potentially the one that learns to work with everything else as opposed to the one that's just totally self-serving.
I think that's true. I think the psychopath is the self-serving one.
Yes.
And the rest of us are the ones that learn to work together. Mm-hmm. And it is an evolutionary struggle because we've had, you know, unfortunately, we're where we are in the world today in terms of, you know, our struggle as a species, not because the elites gave this stuff to us, but we often have to fight for it, sacrifice and struggle for it. You know, we have workers' rights today because our ancestors in the past had to actually riot and go on strike and suffer very badly in order to form unions and so on. So this constant battle has never really been played out inside our own heads. An empathic person is always empathic, but it seems to definitely play out on the macrocosmic level within the societies and within the overall cultures. You look at the history of human civilization, it's literally been a struggle of us against the powerful psychopaths, and to try and like stand up and be respected and be, you know, treated as if, you know, we're a species that deserves to be treated well. Okay.
Now, let's talk about things potentially that could trigger this sort of behavior.
Well, they are born like this, so the behavior would be with them like that all the time. But I'll give you an example of how they function, which is probably a better idea, and how people often notice them in their lives.
Okay.
A psychopath would be someone that you may meet at first, and you might have a strange sort of intuitive notion. Say you're in a relationship, you meet a guy, right? At first you meet him and you have a saying, he's a bit odd, he's a bit strange. And then you might find that he's very flattering, extremely flattering. And then he'll often be quiet when you first meet him. And what he's doing then is he's sussing you out. He's looking for your triggers. At this point, he will start to look for missing aspects in your personality, things that didn't work out. If you had an unhappy childhood, say you didn't have a father, he will pretend to be your father. he will fill in that missing gap. If your last relationship wasn't very sexually interesting, he will be, you know, the lover that any woman would always want. If your children don't have a father, he will pretend to be the perfect father figure. If your hobbies are environmentalism, he'll pretend to be an environmentalist just to win your confidence. And then what happens then is, because of the flattery and all this attention that the woman is receiving, she has rushes of dopamine in her brain. And oxytocin receptors in her brain are also going wild. She's falling in love very, very quickly and very rapidly. Relationships with psychopaths happen instantaneously, very, very quick. He will often declare his love on the spot and want to get married within a couple of days. Many women often find themselves having these whirlwind romances with psychopaths who, you know, that will happen overnight, literally, in a weekend. It's not uncommon for women to contact me and say, I met him on a Friday and got married on a Sunday. And what happens then is, once they have established a relationship, either through marriage, through co-owning property, the psychopath then begins to change. The psychopath then begins to look for an exit strategy after it has got what it wanted from this person. So it may have married this woman for a place to live just for a while, or after her money, after her business, or to learn something from her. And then once he has established that, he then begins the devaluation stage. We've had the idealization and now the devaluation. And he will start playing with her psychology. He will start driving her insane. He will be very cold. All this incredible loving and bonding that took place in the early days will suddenly be stopped and taken away. And she'll be asking herself, what's gone on here? He was like the greatest boyfriend in the world, and now he's the world's worst husband. She can't get any response to that. And what's happening is she's crashing because she's become addicted to the oxytocin and the dopamine in her brain, that she's now having a crash. And what's happening is norepinephrine, the stress hormone from the lower brainstem, is now shooting up all the time because she's now on edge. And this is the point where he can get her to do anything he wants, and she becomes a kind of psychological prisoner through this sort of mean and sweet cycle. He will learn to tray her, and before she knows, an almost kind of Stockholm syndrome sets in, where he can have her do anything he wants. And while he's, you know, bleeding her finances dry or whatever he's doing to her, he will then be looking for an exit strategy to get out. And this is literally what they're like, and this is how most people come into contact with them, through relationships like this. A very fast relationship that was a whirlwind romance and ended in catastrophe, often with the person, the target, suffering from post-traumatic stress injury, and they'll be wondering, what the hell was that? And they'll literally spend years trying to recover. Well, and he will do this to not just one woman or two women, he will do this on an industrial scale.
So what do you reckon is the percentage of people out there? Because you said that obviously these people are born like this. There must be some, as you say, specifically different brainwave activity to people who don't exhibit this kind of behavior. What are we looking at in terms of numbers?
The official numbers would be, is 4% of the population are psychopathic to some degree. So that would probably be 1 or 2% would be like full-blown natural psychopaths, and the rest would probably be a kind of a proto-psychopath, an extreme version of a proto-psychopath. I think the numbers are actually high. I think it's closer to 2%, but they say 4%. We round off all the numbers in the West, it comes out as 4%. So it's 4% are psychopathic to some degree, and the rest of the other 96% of us are just normal people who go through our lives with the follies, mistakes, the loves, the hatreds, and everything that we do. Now that 4%, even though it's pretty small, if you multiply that number across the world, it's pretty huge. And you take away, you have to remember that one psychopath in their life of 70 years or so can leave an unbelievable trail of destruction across the world and across dozens, if not hundreds, of lives. That's what makes them so dangerous. They all hide this behind a mask of sanity. Nobody knows what hit them until this psychopath arrived into their life and literally turned it upside down.
Okay. Now, are psychopaths sometimes killers?
Oh yes, they are.
Okay.
Very rarely, though. Very rarely. Yes, of course they're killers. You know, Ted Bundy's, the Charles Mansons, and so on. They absolutely would be psychopathic killers, but they're very rare to be at them. Very rarely do any of them actually kill. The reason for this is because it's too messy. If they want to kill someone, they'll mostly do it for psychology. They'll destroy that person's psychology to the point where the person will want to commit suicide. It's called murder by suicide. And that way they'll make sure to be in their will or have insurance policies and everything on them, or they'll hire a hit person to do it. But generally a psychopath will very, very rarely actually gets their hands dirty and does killing, but it does happen.
Yeah, okay. Tell do you think people can be turned into psychopaths through sort of altered wave activity, maybe through televisions or, you know, I don't know, the frequencies that are going through the air at the moment, through HAARP and whatever else?
Well, that's a superb question and very, and I'm glad you asked that because I don't get asked this question enough. I was recently leaked a document from a doctor who got it from an American research program in MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, last year. I think it was last year the document came out. No, sorry, 2010. And they discovered that by placing magnetic fields at certain parts of the brain, particularly near the limbic regions, a person's empathy was literally cut off.
Wow.
Literally was cut off. And there's now research with DARPA in the US to create soldiers' helmets. This is quite frightening to think this, that the soldier's actual, you know, helmet will actually switch off the soldier's empathy while he's in battle, so he can actually kill without remorse or kill without you know, feeling. What it literally does is it puts it when you put these magnetic fields near the limbic region, they actually switch. They put your preservation ahead of everyone else. And we did some very interesting studies where they would ask a young guy, if you're crossing a bridge and the bridge was collapsing, would you grab your girlfriend and save her first before you run for safety? And he would say, of course I'd grab my girlfriend first and save her. And when they put the magnetic fields next to their limbic region, they said, no, I'd run for safety, I wouldn't care about her. So this is very disturbing research. Now, where this brings us to another level is, you know, we don't have to think in terms of big, secret military projects. Let's talk about something as powerful as a mobile phone, an Android or an iPhone, which has a very powerful magnetic field right next to your limbic region as you're using it. Now, apart from the issues with cancer and stuff like that, brain tumours, the same thing is happening there. One side of the brain, of the limbic regions, is actually being switched off. And this may be contributing to a lot of this sort of proto-psychopathic behaviour in society. Yes, absolutely, these waves can do this, and it's something we should be very careful of and very, very concerned about. It's something I'm becoming more and more increasingly concerned about with so much Wi-Fi and everything, smart meters. It's not natural for our brains to be bombarded with this much electromagnetic activity. And since I came across that paper from MIT, I've become increasingly concerned that that's actually what's going on with a lot of people.
Yes, indeed. Now, it's interesting you say that, Thomas, because in 2010 I was contacted by a researcher who's been doing in South Africa huge amounts of research on cell phone activity and the impact it has on, particularly on young children and growing brains. And he's discovered there's been an increase in suicide rates through the use of cell phones. And he's categorically shown me the figures and done the links and the numbers, and it looks very, very plausible. And it's, you know, these holding these devices so close to the head actually, you know, apart from switching off empathy, is doing some other damage to people that makes them want to kill themselves. I mean, is suicidal behavior psychopathic?
Well, psychopaths generally don't commit suicide unless there's no other option left, because they wouldn't have this... They wouldn't have, you know, most things that drive people to suicide are things like, you know, they've got tortured souls.
Yeah, sure.
But they don't feel anything like that. Usually they would just, to them when they commit suicide, all their options have been used up and the police are coming for them or something like that. It's just time to check out. You know, that's literally how they see it. They wouldn't even think about their lives or anything at their last moment. Now, this thing with the mobile phones and cell phones, this is something, again, that doesn't surprise me. I went to see a talk recently in English. I was one of the speakers, and this young lad came up afterwards and he gave a demonstration of just using a radiation meter, a Geiger counter, just how much radiation comes off something like a Wi-Fi or a smart meter or a mobile phone. It's incredible the amount of radiation that comes off them, and these things have been approved for, you know, use with children walking around with these very powerful electromagnetic fields right next to their brain. I mean, it really is. There's a lot of irresponsible parenting as well going on. They'll kill kids should be given an iPhone. Not while their skulls are still soft and their brain tissue hasn't fully developed.
Yes, I totally agree. Unfortunately, poor kids, poor moms and dads get put under so much pressure from children to have the latest of everything. It's part of our unfortunate society.
Well, I wouldn't call it unfortunate. I'd say that's a classic example of the psychopathic society. This need to have instant gratification. With like the actual, the culture itself, the actual society as a whole, both in terms of government, corporations, you name it, all the control structures are absolutely psychopathic. And this is where, even if you have never met a psychopath in your life, you're still living within a psychopathic system.
That's very interesting you bring it to that point. So let's move it forward now. What do you see ultimately is the outlook for humanity if this is sort of what we're faced with now, is a psychopathic society?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it. Okay, yeah, it's bad. We're under tremendous control now.
Yeah.
Where the actual surveillance and everything of our lives is unbelievable. At the same time, a lot of people are waking up. A lot of people are questioning their values and their lifestyle, and they're switching off their TVs and they're knowing that this thing is rubbish and this is not a good way to live. So for the first time ever, we have a kind of an emergence, and these would be the most empathic people who said, I've had enough. I don't want to be bothered with this anymore. And so we're having a sense of almost a society that may be growing up. Now it's small, but it's growing. We're a growing minority of people who are becoming increasingly non-compliant with the system. They're not shopping as much. They grow their own vegetables. They keep chickens. They watch TV. They don't watch TV, sorry. They'll do things, read books. They'll have hobbies, and they'll learn skills. This is very important. More and more people are now learning skills because we have a huge skills gap. Our grandparents would have all had amazing skills, especially the ones who grew up in rural areas. They could fix or do anything. That's all been lost through this so-called, civilized society, modern technological society. So a lot of people are waking up and they're breaking away from the system. I meet more and more every day. My attitude would be is that if you can wake yourself up, then that's enough. Because that's you saying, I am not going to comply with the psychopathic system anymore. I'm going to seek a better quality of life. If you do that, you'll find other people have done the same and will be drawn to you. You don't have to join a movement or an organization or a statute or anything like that. It just happens like everything else has ever happened through the history of humans, organically and naturally. So I am quite positive about the future. I do believe that there is better things coming down the road. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are learning about psychopathic behaviors and psychopathic individuals. And I'm looking at their governments and corporations like Monsanto and people like Bill Gates, and they're going, enough already.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Do you think we can heal the psychopathic society? If you say that a psychopath just is like that and that's the way they are, what if someone really has as you say, wakes up, they have a long, hard look at themselves and they go, well, I am sick of inflicting suffering on people to survive because it always comes back to me. Let me see how I can try and make my life better, kind of thing. Do you think we can collectively heal society by perhaps trying to move out of a psychopathic, self-serving mindset?
Oh, absolutely. I know we can. Absolutely we can. I mean, even when I worked in Wall Street, now I was a graphic designer when I was on Wall Street. I wasn't a banker or anything like that. But I knew a lot of these people who were actually working in the financial aspects of these things. And the scary thing is that most of them would be very nice people. But there's a lot of this kind of thing, hear no evil, see no evil. Once I'm getting paid and I don't rock the boat, everything is fine. What it will take really is not so much for people like us to change the world, but to try and get the other ones, the ones who would be compliant with this system, to say enough, to hell with that, I don't want to live like this anymore, I want my conscience free. And if we can reach those people somehow, and I think we are reaching them, very slowly, but we are reaching them, they're the ones who can change. This is why we have to make sure, we have to instill a new set of values into the children who are growing up now, and saying, look, peer pressure is not going to make you happy. Having all the latest gadgets is not going to make you happy. And being, having a perfect body and a perfect figure and having Botox and all the latest fashions is not going to make you happy. What will make you happy is following your own creative awareness. And what human beings are supposed to do is create. That's what our destiny is. We're to create. We're always supposed to create. And if you can instill those values into the next generation, then that'll give us a huge leap, because we'll suddenly have a group of young people who won't have the same need for bling. Unfortunately, with the pharmaceuticals and everything, so many parents are putting their kids on these psychotropic drugs because some psychiatrist or school counselor said the kid has ADHD or something else. This is another issue we have to address as well. But ultimately, it all comes down to myself, yourself, and everyone else, an individual, just living as a sovereign, conscious, independent human being and trying to live your life the best way you can. And you find when you do that, you attract other people like that to you.
Yes, indeed. I absolutely have found that. And funny you say that, because, you know, in times of my life where I think I've exhibited behavior which I thought at the time was psychotic, what I have noticed is I have then drawn dark experiences to me which have helped, which, you know, I've had to work through and grow. Perhaps these psychotic elements are there to teach us something. What do you think about that?
Well, let me correct you there. Psychotic is a very different thing altogether.
Psychopathic
would be mental illness. Someone has no control over their behaviour. A psychopath is very different. They do have control over their behaviour, but they choose to just live on the bad side, on the dark side of things. So that's an important distinction here. We shouldn't be careful not to stigmatise people who have genuine, you know, mental disorders, because they need our love and compassion too. The psychopath is a very different creature altogether. It lives in it knows exactly what it's doing, and it actually enjoys it. Now, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You said about you demonstrate these things, and you've demonstrated these dark sides in yourself in the past. Well, we all have, you know. That's just how it is. I mean, I played in a goth band in New York. I mean, it's as dark as you can get. You know, I wrote. You know, I used to write stand-up comedy material. Well, I'm not embarrassed by these things. These were all fantastic things in my life, because they opened great opportunities for me. But yeah, you know, I mean, we've all done these things. I've done some wild things as well, but they weren't done to hurt people, or they weren't done to damage other people. They were done out of stupidity or immaturity, or, you know, sort of like, a lot of it would have been peer pressure. Now that I look back on it in my own life, in my 20s and stuff, a lot of it would have been like, I definitely had an immaturity there in that sense. But they weren't evil things. Yes. They were just, you know, they weren't evil. They were just what society would deem not a good way, not respectable. But that's okay. You know, that's all right. You know, you're not like that now. You're not like that now. So it doesn't matter. We've learned. We've evolved. We've grown from our experiences. But a psychopath wouldn't. A psychopath would just continue on doing them because that's what they enjoy and that's what they know. Good.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very good distinction. Tell me, what are you doing with your works? You know, I've come across you about a year ago, and I watched one of your videos, and I was thrilled when Malcolm McDonald offered the opportunity for me to perhaps speak to some of the speakers at the Awake and Aware conference in Edinburgh. And I was wondering, you know, are you doing workshops? Are you actually perhaps counselling people? Because this is such a vast knowledge.
Well, I don't counsel people because that's not my job. That's I put the information. I'm just the messenger. Okay. I throw this information out there and I say to people, run with it. If you want to run with it, if you don't like it, that's cool too. That's what I'm just a messenger. I'm just a guy, you know, a small guy standing on the hilltop saying, "Hey, check out this stuff I found out about psychopaths. You might find that interesting too." And that's what my thing is. I do talks when people ask me. Like I said, I'm going up to Edinburgh on the 13th of October, and you know, I'm going to some other places as well. I've done some pretty big events so far, and there's definitely a big interest there. My work is moving, I wouldn't say I'm moving away from psychopaths, I'm moving more into sort of consciousness development now. I'm very interested in left and right brain training and getting people to like use creativity and to sort of deprogram themselves from their sort of left brain, you know, analytical educational mode, which I think that has a lot to do with the problem as well. I think a lot of people, they're out of balance. The education system puts people out of whack. It kind of makes them neurotic and then makes them always dependent upon experts. So that's something I'm doing. I've already done a couple of workshops like that called Breaking the Babylon Mind, and they went down very well. So that's something that interests me greatly going forward. Yes, there's definitely an interest out there. I mean, I'm amazed at how. I mean, when I started talking about this stuff, a year and a half ago, I thought nobody was interested, and I've just been amazed by the thousands and thousands of people who have contacted me and asked me to let me know more. So it shows that there's something going on. There is a sort of a zeitgeist happening where people are suddenly they hear the information about psychopaths, and they say, well, that makes perfect sense in terms of how the world is run today, or these how they can start wars in the Middle East based on weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, kill 1 million people, and have no remorse or regrets about it. So it definitely was something that when people heard it, it clicked with them. So yes, my job now is just to continue to work as share this information with people as possible, much as anyone who wants to hear it. So without being hysterical about it or trying to make it too academic or anything, and to point people in the direction where they can, if they can do their own research. I always tell people never automatically believe everything I'm saying. I'm not a guru. I'm not the world's greatest expert, but go check yourself. Go have a look and see if it resonates with you. And many do, and they get back to me and they say, "My God, you're absolutely right. This stuff is everywhere."
For sure. I also think one of the reasons perhaps people so identify with your information is because you're looking at this, as you said, not from an academic perspective, but really from a progressive, a consciousness perspective, and everyone, I think, can start identifying with that now.
Yeah, I think we're at the actual cusp of some kind of evolutionary change with human consciousness. I'm absolutely convinced of it now. We're at some kind of change point. We may actually be going to the next stage of human evolution, the development of our, just like our prefrontal cortex suddenly developed, almost overnight in evolutionary terms. We could be heading for something similar like that, with probably even better creative and empathic abilities. And I do kind of see signs of that in people. So it's a nice thought. It's something we should hold on to, because it's happened before in the past scientifically. So there's no reason why it shouldn't happen again in the future. So we should always think that we are capable of getting out of this mess, and we're not. We should never think of ourselves as being prisoners.
Absolutely. Well, that's brilliant. Could you tell us a little bit more about your books, just so the listeners can know?
Well, I don't know if you put a link on your website, but I have
Yes.
If you go to my website, thomassheridanarts.com, I've written a brief free ebook that people can download for nothing, called Reject and Survive, the Psychopathic Control Grid. And you can just download that as a PDF. And that's a basic introduction to the topic in the second part of that book. The beginning part is mostly essays and my journey through looking at the world in recent years. That was originally a script for a movie. And then in the back of the book, looking at it from the more spiritual and sort of even supernatural aspects. So you can download that for free. If you like that book and you want to read more, I've got 2 other books, Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath, and Defeated Demons. And both of them are on my website, thomassheridanarts.com. So, download the free one first. If it resonates with you and you want to know more, then, if you want to buy my other books, I'd be delighted.
Of course. Absolutely, Thomas. I'll definitely get hold of the second one. Thank you very much for sending me the link, and I'll put it up on our website. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close off this evening?
I'd just like to say that what you've heard from me tonight, don't try and diagnose yourself, because that's what a lot of us have a tendency to do that. If you're diagnosing yourself and you're worried about it, I can guarantee you're not a psychopath. Another thing to do is not get into a witch hunt mentality, and be very, very, very wary of people who go, he's a psychopath, she's a psychopath, he's a psychopath, and are always pointing the finger and calling other people psychopaths, and naming them, because the chances are they're probably a psychopath themselves who are trying to create a diversion. That's a very common thing. It's called projection, where they blame somebody else for what they're getting up to. And I would just say, remember, you're an amazing human being. You live on an amazing planet, and 96% of the people on this planet are kind, loving, beautiful people. Even if they're not on the surface, the beautiful soul inside them is there to be found. And look for them. They're the ones we need to get, because we need to take care of each other more than ever as a species. And then we have a great opportunity to do it with things like the internet, where we can reach people of all different races and nationalities and so on. And we need to look after each other. And that would be my basic closing statement on that. Would be just take care of one another.
That is beautiful. Thomas, thank you ever so much. That I must say, I didn't expect this to be such an enlightening and informative interview, but absolutely delighted to have you on the air with us this evening.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. That flew by that time.
Yes, it did actually. And I'll have this up in a clip for you later on this week. I'll send it to you. But in the meantime, I'm going to say goodbye to Thomas and goodbye from everyone here at Finding Voices Radio and from Freedom Central. Thanks for being with us, and we look forward to speaking to you again.
Bye, Melody.
Take care then. Bye-bye.